Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. May I ask you to kindly find a seat if you haven't already. We're about to start with the Food Systems for Shared Prosperity, Achieving Equitable, Inclusive and Sustainable Economic Prosperity in Agri-Food Systems and Rural Development session. So if this is not the session that you want to come to, this is the time you disembark. Okay, so we're on the mark. It's 2:30, and it's my deep pleasure to invite and welcome all of you to this hopefully very dynamic session that we're going to have, focusing on equity, inclusion, sustainable economic prosperity in agri-food systems and food transformation. Indeed, I think one of the key areas of focus for this session is going to be thinking about concrete ways that we can identify solutions to the key challenge that we are witnessing today with respect to inequity in the food system. We know that availability of food does not always translate into access to food. We also know that access to food does not always translate to nutrition. So, the focus of this session today is going to be to really unpeel and to decouple some of the challenges that we are witnessing in this space, especially for the bottom billion, and what we can do concretely. It's my privilege, ladies and gentlemen, to also give you a quick run of show, the way we're going to manage this session. After me, I'm going to invite DG Chu to come up and to give his opening remarks. And then we have a very august panel. I essentially put together, I'll give you some framing questions, and then we have a very august panel that will be asked to respond to the question of the key challenges that they witness in this space, and the solutions, in the second round, the solutions that they witness as well. And each one of the panelists will have 2 minutes to respond to the question, because we want to make space also for some deep interaction with the audience. So with that in mind, it's my deep privilege to invite DG Chu to the podium. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon. I'm pleased to address you today on this important topic. Ensuring economic prosperity for all is at the core of the global agribusiness transformation and rural development. Today's meeting brings together broader expertise from around the world to exchange knowledge on how to achieve the equitable, inclusive, sustainable economic prosperity in agri-food system. Agri-food system provide a significant opportunity to generate incomes and facilitate economic growth, unless get a consistent supply and support from the government. You know, agriculture is not the natural happening industry. Also, we need the investment. We need the enabling policy. But a lot of people thought that agriculture is something happening like the growing the plants. We need the sunshine, we need the photosynthesis, we need the water, we need the irrigation. So that's why we always encourage members to establish enabling policy. Otherwise, all the technical people talk how important, how it's a big potential. Everything is possible unless the government takes serious action. Without a serious action, it's just like a dialogue. I'm happy to see a minister here. You should take the action. When I was Westminster, I always push the Prime Minister, President to take the action, because we are poor minister. We don't have money. We don't have resources. But we have data. We have a fact to let the big politician take the political commitment. That's the only solution. So FAO also are willing to establish those kind of dialogue platform for you, and to share the information, to share the other best practice, to push your leaders to take ownership. Without their commitment, ownership, just a seminar, just a forum. Yeah. So I hope after this stock take meeting, I have a feeling more stronger political commitment. That's the aim, together with SG and other leaders we wanted to build on. And all the data, I don't want to repeat all data you can search online. So that's also, it's a FAO bureaucratic. I don't like it, because everywhere you can read FAO is a digital FAO. So why you repeat all this basic information? Yeah, we need thinking together, interact together. You said inclusive. What means inclusive? Because the Europeans, they have a different interpretation. Africa, different interpretation. Or small island states have a different interpretation. Inclusive. Yeah, my friends from Switzerland, definitely they're inclusive. They want to have more subsidy for the government. Yeah? But for the developing country, we don't have money to get the increased higher subsidy. But inclusive should be get the ownership through the participant approach when you want to establish the enabling policy. That's the poor developing nation politician and Minister of Agriculture. You don't invite all your colleagues draft a document, a policy in the office, and then you are going to promote in the farmers. No. We need the participant approach to include inclusiveness. And equitable, not only between man and woman, because Europeans all talk about gender equality. I said FAO has 3 levels, between rich and poor, between rural and urban, and between man and woman. Yeah, that's 3 levels in equality. I know my colleague, she is from UK. They are naturally considered there are no other 2, because here in Italy, outside of Rome, the countryside is a real countryside. So the gap between the urban and the rural also is high. But if you went to the Netherlands, you don't have that high inequality between urban and the rural. So we have to fully understand what the different situation. And then you can have a solution. What is the real solution for these 3 together? Because Nordic, to talk about 40 years about sustainable development. Yeah? Their sustainable development, majority, 90% of developing countries couldn't follow. Because they have, several ministers come to see me, also they are coming from farmer. Their family have 70 cattle, 70 lamb, not cattle, sheep. I said, how can you make life with 70 sheep in Norway? Because they are 90% of the income of her family from the subsidy. In China, at least we need 700 sheep, goats, to make 4 people family have a reasonable life. So, sustainability for developing countries, that's why I said FAO strategy should be started more efficiency. We have limited land, we have limited resources, but we have to change and improve our livelihood. Efficiency is number 1. And then inclusive, we can share our incomes across the different sectors. Yeah? And then the resilience. Resilience means more investment on the rural areas. Not only road, not only well or irrigation system. We need other infrastructure for basic things. Cold chain storages, all this, or post-harvest treatment. So I hope through this dialogue, you will share your best practice. I have no best practice after I left the country 4 years. Yeah? But I hope you can find a solution among yourself. And that's the meaning what we are going to do. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Director General. Such a pleasure to hear your remarks, and especially to comment on 3 types of inequality that we must try and address, right? Rural, urban, man, woman, but also rich and poor. And also the challenge, I think, the gauntlet is out, right? We have to try and find solutions. With that, ladies and gentlemen, I want to quickly introduce myself before I go on to the panel. So I'm Jo Puri. I'm the Associate Vice President of Strategy and Knowledge at the International Fund for Agricultural Development, or IFAD. And I want to show you a couple of slides before we go into the panel discussion. If I could just ask the slides to be put up. Thank you. I think one of the key things that I just want to remind you, even though you're hearing these messages, is that global hunger today has been virtually unchanged, despite the increasing efforts made by the international community to deal with it, and is still far above the pre-COVID level. And you've seen this as part of the State of Food Insecurity report that was brought out together by FAO, IFAD, UNICEF, WFP, and WHO. So I ask you to look at the right side of that slide. Moving on, I think the important thing is to recognize that moderate and severe food insecurity have remained unchanged as well. And what I'm really looking at is this part of the graph, which is for global communities at large. So not disaggregating this right now between Africa, Asia, and other parts of the globe, really seeing that we are plateauing out in terms of dealing with insecurity, food insecurity. Some of the key takeaways, I think, that are important for us at policy to consider are, first, that 1 in 9 people were undernourished in 2022. Second, that 600 million people will be chronically undernourished in 2030. Third, that hunger, and very pointedly, is still on the rise in Western Asia, specifically Caribbean, and almost all sub-regions of Africa. But the key headline message is that almost half of the world's population, almost half, is unable to afford healthy diets. And this is something that we've got to really deal with as we go forward, as we think about solutions. In our own work, one of the dimensions of inequity that we've examined is really to understand the dimensions of this food insecurity in the urban-rural divide. And what we are finding is that food insecurity is predominantly and higher amongst female-headed households, more than half, is almost half amongst the poorest of the poor, so those below $1.8 in PPP terms. More than almost 2/3, basically, on average, for those who are multidimensionally poor, and almost half for small-scale producers, right? So 47% food insecurity prevalence amongst small-scale producers is 47% in terms of incidence. What we're also finding, and this is my last slide, is really seeing that access to food, and this is the right-hand side of my slide, does not translate to access to nutritious food. So in rural areas, people are less able to get access to diverse foods, and they're also far more likely to be consuming sweets instead of a more diversified food consumption basket, which includes fruits, for example. This is the kind of inequality that we also need to deal with as we go forward thinking about food system transformation pathways. Thank you. With that, I hope we have some of the framing questions, and what I want to do is to turn over to my very august panel. I'm going to ask all of you to look at the websites for deeper introductions of the panel. But what I'm going to do now is to turn to my panel and ask them the first framing question that we'll ask them to attend to in 2 minutes, please. And the question is, what in your experience is a key challenge in ensuring that economic benefits of agri-food systems are equitably and inclusively shared so that they can bring about impacts on food security and on environmental and social outcomes? I'm going to turn to Ms. Westberg from Norway first, and then we'll have Mr. Christian Hofer, His Excellency Amente, Mr. Dae Tae-an, Mr. Pogum, Ms. Jeremiah Njuki, and last but definitely not the least, Mr. Bager. So in the order, please, ladies and gentlemen, over to you. And I'll call time.
Thank you very much. Distinguished Excellencies, Ministers, and colleagues, thank you for the opportunity to participate in this leadership dialogue. Firstly, let me start by thanking DG Chu for his opening remarks. Around the world, food systems are facing a triple challenge: ensuring food security and nutrition for a growing population, supporting the livelihoods of millions of farmers and others in the food chain, and doing so in an environmentally sustainable way. Unfortunately, food systems are currently a long way off from meeting those challenges. As an example, I would like to highlight some findings in the newly published and excellent, if I might say, report by FAO on the role of women in agri-food systems. Globally, 22% of women lost their jobs in the off-farm segment of agri-food systems in the first year of the COVID, compared with only 2% of men. Women's access to land, inputs, services, finance, and digital technology continues to lag behind men's. Among the main lessons of the report is that increasing women's empowerment is not just essential for women's well-being, but it is also vital for agricultural production and food security. In Norway, ensuring equal participation in the sector is a priority. As entrepreneurs, women contribute with value creation and income-generating activities in off-farm activities in the value chain. Their full participation in the sector is therefore also key to vibrant and economic viable rural communities. Long-term profitability is key to make the sector attractive to young farmers, and recruitment to agriculture is a major challenge faced by the sector. In many places around the world, rural youth face a crisis of employment. The agriculture sector must provide interesting job and income opportunities. As a response to the challenge of equitable food systems, we need to build mechanisms that ensure participation. Strong, well-established organizations of family farmers can contribute to policy change in many areas, and in particular, equitable growth. Family farming holds the key to maintaining the diversified production systems that sustainably manage natural resources. A basic notion of agriculture is to combine both use and renewal of resources. This has been handed down by farmers as a legacy through history, and we should strive to keep this up. I think we will talk more about the concrete action later on, and I will therefore round up by highlighting the need to empower all food system actors. Family farming and agroecological approaches that promote diverse food production systems must be a source of economic vitality and job creations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Westberg. Mr. Christian Hofer, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Excellencies. To the first question, the main challenges, I think one of the biggest challenges really, how can we be better in an environmental way, and on the other hand also in an economical way. One concrete example in Switzerland is how to reduce the climate impact of livestock while safeguarding the strong economic value-adding sector in Switzerland. And this is one of the real critical questions we have in Switzerland if we want to transform the food system. And I think in that way it's very important that the economic, environmental and social dimensions of sustainable development must be promoted together. Otherwise, we will not achieve the transformation towards a sustainable food system. In this regard, the Swiss Federal Council, the executive branch of our federal government, released a report on the future orientation of Switzerland's agriculture policy beyond 2030. The report adopted a food system approach in that it proposes measures along the entire value chain and also the three dimensions: economy, ecology and the social topic. It's like anticipating climate change impacts, reducing nutrition losses and risk from plant protection products. That's the environmental part. On the other hand, strive for a fair distribution of added value or address true cost of food and simplify the choice of sustainable products for the consumers. According to our Federal Council's vision, this policy should be oriented toward a more systemic perspective that looks not only at goals in relation to more sustainable agricultural production practice, but also healthier and more environmentally friendly consumption patterns in generating 2/3 less greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 as compared to 2020. In concretely, what are now the solutions there? When it comes to investments to enable an inclusive and sustainable approach to generating economic prosperity, broad and inclusive efforts are needed, including from the public and private sector. We need to repurpose agriculture support to promote a sustainable food system transformation. Private investors, philanthropists, banks and multilateral funders should redirect financial flows away from unsustainable practice, use their resources to catalyze opportunities in sustainable food system and work together to better align public and private finance, thereby creating greater impact. We need investment in market opportunities such as shorter supply chains, circular economy and direct marketing. We invest a lot in Switzerland to the farmers and to the rest also of the value chain. This would also address issues that relate to the rural-urban divide, where consumers and producers of food do not understand each other anymore. Investment needs to turn this divide into a continuum between rural and urban spaces. Finally, we need to invest in the behavioral change on the consumer side. We need to make sustainable choice for the consumer easier. And that's why the report is 2050 to change behavior. It's not from one year to the other, it's a generation. You need to really change a behavior. Otherwise, you can't do it in a social manner that you have the support from the home population. So this involves awareness, raising clever incentives and food education from the young age. We do not only need to address youth as important actors in food production, but also the consumers of tomorrow who will need to make the right choices. We have one program, that's schools to the farm. So we bring the young generation on the farms that they see how are the farmers working, and what is behind the food, that they really realize what is behind what they eat. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hofer, Your Excellency.
Thank you, moderator. His Excellency Dr. Chu Dong-gu, Director General of FAO, Excellencies, distinguished guests. In Ethiopia, we define the scope of food system transformation in a way that it is holistic and inclusive to promote enhanced production and productivity, enhanced food safety and nutrition, improved livelihoods, greater land preservation and restoration, greater resilience to shocks and stressors, and uniting all stakeholders around a common goal for a healthy and sustainable diets for all. The challenge is that agriculture in my country is dominated by smallholder farmers, which are challenged by access to finance, to rural finance. Most of the farmers, even though they have assets in the rural areas, their livestock, their perennial crops, their land, those are not taken as a collateral by local banks or others, so access to finance is very difficult. And although Ethiopia is considered as a water tower in Africa, still less than 10% of our agricultural lands have access to irrigation. That means our agriculture is still dependent on rainfed, so that is very exposed to climate shocks. Access to inputs and technologies, and access to rural electrification, poor logistics and storage infrastructure, which is resulting actually poor harvest loss, increasing harvest loss, post-harvest loss, which is almost up to 30% of the total production, is really one of the challenging areas. And of course, equitable benefit sharing across the value chain is again another issue because of poor market information and infrastructure from what is produced and marketed. What is going back to the producer is really very small. Most of the values are taken by other value chain actors, which really is not creating or giving incentives to the producers to increase production and productivity. So this needs really having equitable benefit sharing from the producers to the end users. And actually, as far as rural and urban linkages are concerned, most of the rural youth are migrating to the urban areas because they are lacking really skills and trainings, even to participate in the few agribusinesses that are really existing. So we have to reverse these situations and give access to finance, access to agricultural water, and of course build capacities and skills so that the youth, women, and particularly the rural poor are benefiting from the value chain. Maybe in terms of actions, I will come back later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Yes, we'll go around for solutions as well. And now, Mr. Dao Te An from Vietnam, please.
Thank you, moderator. So, Excellency and colleagues. So, from Vietnam experience, we consider food system with three elements: production, trading, and consumption. So the challenge is allocating the own three elements. So in the production element, you know that Vietnam agriculture and success story was recognized by intensive family farming, that government allocates the land for every family equitably. And government investing in the agriculture and research, the extension system from central to local, and also very important investment on the irrigation system in order to guarantee the water resources access to every farmer. But the successful story of green revolution by intensive agriculture can contribute to national food security, and Vietnam become exporter of food, especially rice, since 15 years continuously. But can also create a lot of negative impact in terms of land degradation, water pollution, forest loss, and also losing of agrobiodiversity. And nowadays, this agriculture is facing the new challenge to transform from agri-production to agribusiness for responding to the changing the demand of the world market with the multi-sectoral perspective, such as the lack of, there is a question that the lack of agroecological knowledge and services to adapt for climate change, and the capacity of responding to the market standards and the demand of the diverse domestic and international market of small farm. Also, improving the quality, particularly the food safety condition, and capacity to organize in a good cooperative, and in an inclusive value chain, and also lack of capital and we need the investment. So for the consumption element, the consumer lack of knowledge and practices on the sustainable healthy diet. So even Vietnam is an exporter of food, and also we are facing the challenge of trade burden of malnutrition and environmental impact. So in the trade component, the main challenge is due to the poor condition of logistics, post-harvest, so the high food loss is very important. So Vietnam try to resolve this problem. So in general, in the food system, the main challenge is the lack of effective coordination across the sector, agriculture, trade, and health. And we need the collaboration amongst actors in the food system to react, and also the contribution of the rapid urbanization in Vietnam also contribute to the differentiation of the access to the food. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vice President. I now have Mr. Jean-Marie Pogum.
Thank you, Moderator, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. As my neighbor just said, we have to think about trade as the other side of the coin of production in agri-food systems. There is a statistic which is that boldly 20% of calories are being traded in the world. So when it comes to inclusivity, the problem arises when the policies encouraging production in one country are disrupting production in another country through trade. And all the challenge of international cooperation is to strike the right balance between those two policies, the one which encourage trade and the one which encourage production. Now, the good news is that we have in the WTO all the tools to try to solve this conundrum. And for instance, if we take one central issue, which is distorting subsidies, we have a toolbox which distinguishes bad subsidies, which are distorting, and good subsidies, which are encouraging, including the environmental protection. When it comes to the sustainability challenge, we know that climate change, for instance, is going to impact all the geography of production and consumption patterns, and that we have to reduce the global footprint of agriculture. Here again, we have the tools to foster innovation in agriculture to fight climate change. One of these tools is obviously subsidies. Once again, my colleague from Switzerland suggested redirection in a better environmentally friendly objective of subsidies. Another tool is market opening for dissemination of agricultural innovation, which will contribute to the fight against climate change. And we also have a science-based framework which will help make interoperable the innovations that are going to be developed in several countries. So we have all those tools, but the bad news is that we are not using them correctly. We are in a stalemate in the WTO on our agricultural negotiation, especially to try to find this right balance between the policy space in some countries to encourage production, for instance, through food buying government programs which set the price above the market price, and the policy space needed from others to encourage trade. So we need to leverage that, and this is my key message for agricultural ministers today. You need to think of the trade toolkit all the time. It's part of your toolkit, and you need to shoulder with your trade colleagues to try to leverage this negotiation into achieving the objectives of inclusivity and promoting a more sustainable agriculture. I'll stop there. That's my first message.
Thank you very much, Deputy Director. I now have Ms. Njuki.
Thank you very much. It's such a pleasure to be here. I am going to talk about gender equality and food systems transformation, because we know these are intertwined. We cannot achieve one without the other, and we have seen from empirical evidence over a long time how food systems have actually embedded multiple and intersecting forms of inequality in them. I want to talk about two dichotomies that we see, and specifically from this report that has just been launched. The first one is that we see very high engagement of women in agri-food systems. 66% of women in sub-Saharan Africa work in agri-food systems, 71% in Southern Asia. And yet, we have a huge gender pay gap, with women actually just getting 82 cents for every dollar that men make in agri-food systems. And we have seen a food insecurity gap that the moderator talked about earlier. The second dichotomy I want to talk about is where those women are. So despite the 66% and 71%, we have been tracking leadership, global leadership within food systems organizations. Only 2% of board seats in these food systems organizations are held by women from low and middle income countries. So we see we have a power issue in food systems as far as gender equality is concerned. We need to redistribute that power. So we need a huge paradigm shift that actually embeds investments in food systems from a human rights perspective, and basically from a common sense perspective in many ways, because we know what needs to be done. The political will to do it is sometimes missing. We need to make investments in women. We need to make investments in gender equality, because we know if we invest in women, if we invest in their organizations, if we invest in their access to decent work, if we invest in their access to markets, that we actually will have returns to that investment in our food systems, but also women themselves. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director. And last but definitely not the least, Mr. Günther Beger.
Yeah, thank you very much. For me, it's perhaps easy, but I think all the things I prepared are said. So perhaps let me come to one more point. And I want to follow up on both previous speakers from WTO and from UN Women. In principle, we know what to do. We know what to do, and we know it from the last conference and other conferences, but the challenge is, and that's for me the biggest challenge, how we come into action. And I remember in preparation of the 2021 Food Systems Summit, there was a study published by FAO together with the Zentrum for in Germany, CEF, Zentrum für Entwicklungsforschung, and this study exactly described what to do, what investment are necessary in seeds, what investment in crop protection, fertilization, agriculture mechanization, investment infrastructure, storage, processing. And I think perhaps some of the authors are here in the room and can say more on it. But in this study was also calculated to the dollar what is necessary to invest in each of these fields. And the authors calculated an amount of 50 billion euros over 10 years. But, dear moderator, slide I missed, and that is more or less the development of the official development order. I think this is in this direction. And that is something I'm very happy that at FAO, that Director General Dongu, it was fascinating to see how many head of states were invited and came to Rome in this year. And I think this is a strong commitment for the world community to come into action, not to speak, as you said, to come into action. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That was extremely enlightening. And what I want to do is to really remark on, I think, some of the key challenges that the speakers spoke on. Everyone spoke eloquently about the big divide that we are seeing, whether with respect to women and men, the percentage of jobs being lost in off-farm sectors, the importance of family farming, the importance of recognizing, for example, the salience of livestock in the overall climate agenda and trying to see as to how we can reduce the emissions from that sector, but also bringing in public and private solutions and looking at behavioral change, as well as focusing on youth. We also had really eloquent remarks on the problems of smallholder farmers, access to finance, the absence of infrastructure, the rural-urban wage divide, but also the importance for incentives for benefit sharing. the importance of family farming and the importance of moving from traditional agriculture to agribusinesses, the importance of feeding into international markets, and the importance of looking at food loss, reducing food loss, and therefore collaborating across sectors, across different stakeholder groups was also highlighted. We also heard about the recognizing that there can be good subsidies but also bad subsidies. And we have the toolbox to really address some of those challenges, but what is important is using them to understand how a science framework can help to both open markets but also ensure equity. We also noted the importance of recognizing the wage gap and the power gap that exists in the agriculture sector. That was very eloquently pointed out. And really recognizing the importance of a paradigm shift. And last but definitely not the least, the importance of really seeing an uptick in the overall ODA. So while we're recognizing that, yes, $50 billion might be required per year for the next 10 years, what we also heard is that it's really important for there to be push to really increase the amount of ODA, which we know has been flatlining so far. What I want to do, ladies and gentlemen, is really turn to the speakers yet again, and I'm going to reverse the order, but I'm going to go a little bit off script. And I'm going to ask you only one very precise question. What is your top-ranked solution? Top-ranked, and I know that there are many solutions to a lot of the problems, but identify amongst the menu of solutions that I know all of you have. But if you could talk for a minute each, please, your top-ranked solution in terms of what you would do next in terms of concrete action to deal with the challenges of equity, to deal with the challenges of sustainability, and or to deal with the problem of lack of inclusion. And again, your solution doesn't have to address all of those challenges, but at least we have a solution which is concrete. The gauntlet is out. I'm going to reverse the order. You're first. A minute each, please.
Thank you very much. Another challenge. Perhaps let me add one more point. I think we also have to speak about post-harvest processes, storage and processing, and also establishment of farm jobs. And one successful example we from UNIDO introduced are our agro-industrial parks, which are being financed in some African countries with World Bank and AFDB funding. These parks are located in close neighborhood of agriculture production in the countryside and offer the necessary facilities like electricity, infrastructure, warehouse, and also establishment of processing industry. That is something what created added value. And I think this is the next sort of a very important step. Production increasing is good, and you also mentioned at the beginning, it's not always a question of availability of food, it is a question of excess of food, and I think that could be a solution for other countries.
Fantastic. Agro-industrial parks. Mr. Juki.
Thank you. 3 solutions: invest in women, and then invest in women. Because if women are in food systems, we need to make those food systems work for them. So wherever we are, whatever sectors we are in, if we are in financial services, making sure that those financial services are working for women. If we are working on trade, making sure that those trade policies work for women. If we are working in extension services, making sure those extension services are reaching women and are addressing the needs and priorities of women, because we know there's benefits. If we can't achieve women's empowerment, we won't achieve food systems transformation.
Thank you, Director. And Mr. Pogan, please. Thank you.
Thank you. First solution, keep refraining. This is to fight the food crisis. Keep refraining from export restriction. Export restriction on food. This is not to deny the right of every country to keep the food when there is a moment of crisis. But if countries do not cooperate to allow the free flow of food, then we aggravate the problem. And last year we did start this effort. Everybody started refraining. It has had a deep impact on the prices. The prices went below, decreased from 25%. So it works. The problem that we have facing now with the interruption of the Black Sea Grain Initiative shows that it's very fragile. So we need to keep that effort refraining from export subsidies, from export restriction. Now, the second point is more structural. We need to reduce the distorting subsidies in trade. It's possible. We have done it in the past with export subsidies. We eliminated 99% of them. And I remember when I started my career as a European negotiator, we had frozen chicken going to Africa cheaper than the local chicken. This is over, so it's possible to do the job and reduce those trade distorting subsidies. Now, we need some push from agricultural ministers to restart this effort, and this will be the key to sustainable agri-food system based on trade.
Thank you. So we have invest in women, invest in women, invest in women, including in the financial sector, trade and extension services. And we also have refrain from export restrictions and reduce distortionary trade subsidies. Vice President, you're on next.
Yes, thank you. So I think that solution, we need to combine bottom-up approach and top-down approach in order to have the impact as can. So in Vietnam, we are now trying to already bring the National Action Plan for Food System Transformation to work transparency, resourcefulness, and sustainable by 2030. So this is a tool for coordination, and also we are under this National Action Plan. We bring partnership with different international organizations, and also private sector, different stakeholder group. This is a tool to mobilize and to avoid the overlap of the resources, because we need investment in the food system. But what do you do with farmers, with local people? So in the production, we turn from intensive agriculture completely to agroecological strategy. So we have to work with community, with the support from academia, from research. We have CGIA, we have CIRAT, it's a different organization support us to develop the training material and to work on agroecology transition. And also at the same time, we have intervention, have to have intervention in the consumption and production at the same time. So we are promoting healthy diet practices and raising awareness for consumers. It's very important, because if a farmer try to produce a good agricultural product, but consumer don't accept, we don't have good incentive, market incentive. So I think that this is our solution. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Your Excellency.
Okay, thank you. From my point of view and from the challenges we have, I think we have to transit agriculture from subsistence level to a commercial enterprise, or as a business enterprise. In most of the African countries, our farmers are producing just for their food, but we have to transit that into a business enterprise. Our extension and support system should really work on that regard. For that, we have to aggregate our smallholder farmers into commercial clusters to provide them extension and technical services easily. Of course, this needs a financial inclusion. That means rural assets that our poor farmers are having should be really recognized and valued by financial institutions to be used as a collateral to provide them access to loans and services. And at the end of the day, of course, to have a fair share of their produce, there should be a market linkages, particularly having contractual farming between, as it is already mentioned by UNIDO, between industrialists and producers, so that they can have a mutually beneficial partnership, and that even industrialists provide inputs and technical advices to the smallholder farmers. I think that will be one of the ways to transform our smallholder farmers into a commercial enterprise. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency. And what I'm hearing both from Vietnam as well as from Ethiopia is clearly in the context of national food system transformations, we need to be thinking of transitioning from the current systems that we have in the case of Vietnam to an agroecological strategy. But we also need to be focusing on bringing in other sorts of sectors, so the private sector, into these overall national food system transformation pathways, and to be looking at changing the demand for healthy diets. And that's not happening sufficiently, but that's clearly something we've got to focus on. And what we heard in Ethiopia is a movement away from subsistence agriculture to these commercial clusters, so that we can truly ensure that there is this aggregate economies of scale, if I might add, Your Excellency. But as we are thinking about contract farming, as we are thinking about developing these incentives to really get those farmers that have been left behind the access to finances, the access to technical advice, and really the access to infrastructure, which has been missing so far. Thank you so much. Mr. Hopper.
Yeah, thank you. I think the solution is true cost of food. That means environmental unfriendly production, or a production that is not social should not be profitable. If we come to that point, I think we will reach the goal. You need dialogue. That means you need a dialogue from farmers to consumers, from consumers to farmers, that there is an understanding of the production and what this production does with our environment. You need transparency. That means the consumers must know what they buy in a product. And maybe the third point is you need an internalization of the external costs, that you really have the true cost of food.
Fantastic. And this resonates with me, if I might just editorialize, because according to a report that came out last year, and IFAD was part of that, the overall cost of food, the price of food, is $8 trillion, but the value of that food is $12 trillion if you incorporate the true cost of production. So it really does go down to creating those incentives that you spoke about, Mr. Hofer, and inserting them into the food system if we truly want to make that transition. Thank you. Last but definitely not least.
Thank you, Chair. Top concrete actions in Norway would be to involve the farmers, of course, including the women and the youth, like a farmer-based approach, involve the farmers in finding solutions to new challenges such as climate change. Concrete actions in Norway are therefore based on a model where design of agricultural policy involves annual negotiations between the government and the farmers' organizations. This model has also proved very valuable in finding solutions to new challenges such as climate change. The government has negotiated a climate agreement on emissions reductions with the farmers' union. And I believe that the solutions that put farmers in the center of custodians of natural resources has the best chance to success. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Westberg. And clearly, I think what you're pointing out is the inherent political process that we are all encountering in food systems if we truly want to address the trade-offs that clearly come about between effectiveness on one side and efficiency on one side and equity on the other and inclusion on the other. And really the importance of dialogue and the importance of participation and holding and making farmers the custodians of a large part of our overall economy. Thank you very much for that. Ladies and gentlemen, we're at that wicked hour where I get to open this up to all of you. And we do have a little bit of a luxury. We have about 25 minutes for Q&A that you might direct your questions. And please, I'm going to ask you, we've done quite well so far, but what I'm going to ask you is to keep your questions to being questions. So please state your question very, very pithily. And if you can, address it to someone on the panel, but don't worry if you don't want to identify a panelist. But my only ask is pithy questions. I have one take already. Please introduce yourselves there, and a pithy question, and then I have a second. Thank you.
I'm Ratan Lal, Professor of Soil Science, Ohio State. True cost of production. What does it mean? Does it mean including cost of soil degradation, greenhouse gas emissions, water pollution, water scarcity? What particular cost do you want to be paid and by whom?
Great question. We'll take 3 or 4 and then we'll go to the panel. Yes, please introduce yourself.
Merci, moi je suis Dr Djibril Bagayogo, je viens du Mali et je me vois beaucoup dans cette session parce que pour nous, la question qui se pose, quelle est la solution? Les gens ont donné, vous avez vu la diversité, on se trouverait mieux avec l'Éthiopie et le Vietnam parce qu'aujourd'hui on a besoin de leaders, des champions qui peuvent ne pas avoir toutes les solutions, mais peuvent responsabiliser les autres. Parce que le défi le plus important, tout ce qu'on a dit ici, c'est vrai, c'est important pour nous tous, parce qu'on comprend. Mais le défi, c'est de penser différemment, mais convaincre les autres d'agir différemment. Et à tous les niveaux. De ce fait, il faut qu'on parvienne à avoir cet accord intelligent. Parce que 50 ans, 60 ans, pour d'autres, on a donné l'impression que les secteurs peuvent travailler de manière isolée. C'est-à-dire même au niveau politique, au niveau stratégique, les gens ont cette culture de travailler en silo. Mais comment aujourd'hui, du jour au lendemain, on leur demande de travailler tous ensemble? Je vous donne un seul exemple. Monsieur le ministre de l'Agriculture de l'Éthiopie peut le témoigner. Quand il parlait de la sécurité sanitaire des aliments, dans certains de nos pays, ça n'intéresse pas le ministre de l'Agriculture, alors que sans alimentation saine, le coût va être très énorme. En venant dans cette session, je n'ai pas vu cette solution de chercher des leaders qui peuvent changer les choses. Et je pense que c'est le plus important si on veut aller vite et sûr, parce qu'il s'agit de changer le niveau de conscience. Comme Albert Einstein le disait, aucun problème ne résolu que lorsque le niveau de conscience qui a engendré le problème. Parce qu'aujourd'hui, on a engendré une autre façon de travailler, une autre culture de travail. Et comme vous voyez, tous les parties prenantes ont parlé de leur domaine. Les femmes ont parlé des femmes, le commerce. Et du coup, alors que ce n'est qu'un problème unique qui concerne les ménages, sa vie et son devenir. Voici ce que j'avais à dire. Merci.
Thank you, sir. I'm going to make that a question. What do we need to bring people together? I'm going to try and see if the panel has responses to that. Anyone else, please?
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. My question goes specifically to
Introduce yourself,
Neil
please.
Faree from the UK Permanent Mission in Rome, and my question goes specifically to our distinguished director from UN Women. Last month, we concluded some heavy negotiations on the empowering of women and girls in the agricultural sector. Besides culture, what would be the top 2 issues we can address to ensure that women are empowered? Because we know that empowering women in the agricultural sector will bring brilliant returns. Thank you.
Thank you for being so specific. One last question for this round. Kindly please introduce yourself.
Yes, my name is Kage Maso, the Director of Environmental Health Impact Platform of CGIR. My question is related to the production cost. There was a comment that was made by one of the panelists that sometimes the imported chicken is more cheaper than the chicken produced locally. Now, my question is really what can be done in terms of supporting really the developing countries in a way or another so that the cost of production could be brought at a relatively acceptable level so that imported chicken, imported rice can't be cheaper than what is grown locally. And I'm glad to see UNIDO at the table because I do believe industrialization of the regions would be very useful. What can be done? Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to try and get responses from the panel, and kindly please raise your hands. I have 2 questions on the cost of production. Christian, I don't know if you want to take that, but anyone else who wants to come in on the cost of production, that would be fantastic. I also have a question for UK women on what 2 things we'd like to see change. And then I have an invitation to the panel. If you have a compelling way to bring about that leadership that one of our audience members asked for, and to break down the silos. And if you've got a compelling way to take that forward, kindly please raise your hand. So I'm going to go to Mr. Hoffer first. I'm going to go to Ms. Najuki second, and then Your Excellency, and I also have our WTO colleague, and then at the end. Thank you very much. So in that order, please.
Yes, so thank you very much for the question about what kind of costs and who is paying these costs. We were asked for a quick solution and not for the most easiest one. And I know that it's not easy to introduce such a solution with the true cost of food. But we know in Switzerland we had some modeling what are costing different kind of production. For example, if you don't look after the soil, and now we are paying by the society many millions to repair the soil, or we had a lot of lakes that were already dead because the production was so intensive, and now the society is paying to revitalize these lakes. So what kind of costs? I think one point could be really the greenhouse gas, that you put something like a tax on greenhouse gas, that it makes food, that the cost is inclusive in this food, and that really the non-environmental produced food is more expensive than the other one. Then the second question, who is paying it? I think that must be a discussion in each country, who is paying it. Till now, all the costs in Switzerland is paying the society by taxes, that all the negative emissions by the production were paid by the society to resolve the problems we had. I think there are different types of possibilities who is paying the costs. We know in Switzerland it's quite difficult to say at the end the food will be more expensive at the end if all the costs should be paid by the consumers. Then we had discussions with all the consumers that a food that is more expensive, that's not good for the whole society and for the poor people. So I think this discussion really must be in each country. If you want to try to look a solution with true costs of food, how you deal with who is paying this real cost.
Thank you, Christian. Ms. Najuki.
So in addition to changing some of the cultural social norms that we know are harmful and are holding women back, I would say two other key things. One is closing the current gender gaps that we have in technology access, whether that's digital technologies, whether that's financial technologies and innovations, whether that's the gap in access to even childcare services and the technologies that reduce women's labor in agri-food systems. So there is a huge technology gap access and use that we know exists, and what that's doing then is contributing to a gender gap in agriculture productivity and productivity of agri-food systems. The second thing I would say is investing in women's voice, leadership, and decision-making. Because if women are not at the table, then we're really missing on some of the innovations, some of the insights, some of the experiences that women have. So making sure that women are actually part of the decision-making processes, whether those are policy decisions, whether they are community decisions, because it's good for all of us. So it's very, very clear what we actually need to do. I do want to make a comment on the leadership. I know when we come to the table, we talk about the things that are all passionate to each one of us, but we really need to bring them together. I was part of the UN Food Systems Summit in 2021, and the joy of that summit was each country came up with a food systems transformation pathway. That's really a mechanism to get everybody on board. whether you're working on climate, on trade, because we need that whole continuum to work. And we are trying some of that in the UN system as well. I know between UN Women, IFAD, WFP, and FAO, we have a lot of joint programming that really brings a lot of these issues together across countries, working very closely with governments. And one of those is the joint program on rural women's economic empowerment.
Thank you so much. So we'll go, Your Excellency, Mr. Pogum, and then Mr. Baker. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I just want to react on this, how to bring people together for the actions. That is a very important question. Actually, it is always we discuss bring people together to discuss about challenge and bring people together to discuss and bring the way forward and solutions. But it is not easy always to bring people together for actions. This needs actually a very strong commitment from the leadership, as it is already raised. A good example for that in Ethiopia is Ethiopia was importing wheat for the last 15 years, even though we have land, water, and the human capital. And then the leadership decided that we have to replace this and we have to produce it at home. And then in 3 years, we managed to do that by mobilizing universities, research, and all institutions, rather than discussing in the rooms, to go to the farmer's land and to the farmer's plot and really discuss things practically on the ground. So we are now a net zero wheat import this year. So what I really suggest is that there should be a commitment actually from the leadership, and of course, go directly to the grassroots and work with the farmers on the field. That is where the action are. In most cases, our times are consumed while we are discussing on the meeting halls and rooms, and our energy is consumed before we go to the field and to the ground. So that is one of the experiences we have in Ethiopia. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Mr. Pogum?
Moderator. On the question of production cost and leveling the playing field, what we are asking in the WTO, what our rules ask, is to reduce all the supports which goes to the prices or the quantities, that is, which distort the market signals. So this has to be reduced. It's perfectly legitimate to support the incomes of farmers, the infrastructures, the training, the environmental programs. This is no problem. So this is how we deal with the question of production cost. On the question of leadership, I'll move to French to answer to our colleague from Mali. Sur la question de pourquoi coopérer, le meilleur argument, c'est que ça marche. C'est que les solutions collectives et coopératives sont meilleures. On l'a vu 2 fois dans les années récentes, une fois avec la crise du Covid. Qu'est-ce qui s'est passé au début de la crise du Covid? Tous les pays ont d'abord commencé à essayer de garder leurs molécules, leurs masques, leurs instruments sanitaires, etc. Et puis très vite, ils se sont aperçus qu'il fallait mieux pouvoir les échanger parce que tout le monde n'avait pas les mêmes besoins. Et on a vu le commerce des biens sanitaires augmenter alors que tout le reste du commerce mondial s'effondrait. Même chose avec la crise alimentaire. Au début, tous les pays ont voulu garder leur nourriture en mettant des restrictions à l'export. On en a compté une centaine, nous, à l'OMC. Et puis, ils se sont aperçus qu'en laissant les flux de nourriture se faire, ça fonctionnait mieux. Et aujourd'hui, c'est redescendu à environ 50 mesures de restriction aux exportations. Donc les solutions coopératives, c'est comme ce que les économistes appellent le dilemme du prisonnier. Les solutions coopératives sont supérieures aux solutions non coopératives, et c'est ça le meilleur argument pour travailler ensemble.
Yes, thank you very much. I just want to mention a point to my colleague who spoke about import of chicken and consequences for the internal market. I think, yeah, of course, also my colleague from WTO mentioned reduction of export subsidies. That's more or less done worldwide. The other question is subsidies of production. That's all right, but I think we all know that there are two sides of the coin. The other one is it has to do with also quality of products in your countries, and that is something what I tried to mention when I also spoke about the system of, for example, agro-industrial parks. That means we have to strengthen the whole value chain. I have a very good example. There was a company from Germany comes to me and told me that they want to invest in milk processing in Nigeria because they send milk powder but also produced milk products from Germany to Nigeria because there is a market. And then they thought about investments, and I was very happy. But the second sentence was yes, but we want to export on our milk powder, and then we protest this milk powder in Nigeria because of lack of quality of also quantities of milk. And so you see that is very more or less question we have to discuss on the other side, how we can improve value chains, how we can improve processing and also quality infrastructure in the countries.
Yes, please.
Bon, peut-être je vais aussi réagir sur la question de nécessité de la coopération. Le Vietnam, actuellement, on est en train d'exporter de riz vers l'Afrique pour certains pays. Mais on est en train de penser et on est en train de négocier pour développer les coopérations sur la recherche, pour renforcer les capacités de système de recherche et extension dans certains pays africains, plutôt que d'exporter le riz, de travailler ensemble pour aider différents pays africains à produire sur place, donc avec Sierra Leone, Ouganda, Mozambique, etc. Je pense oui, Vietnam est actif dans la coopération suite avec la FAO. Merci.
Thank you. We have time for 2 questions, if you promise to keep them pithy, from the floor. Is this a follow-up question, Professor?
It's a follow-up comment about my cost.
Can I, if you don't mind, can I just see if there's another question, and then I'll allow the follow-up? Any others? Okay, so we have the lady in blue, the young lady here, and then the professor. So.
Donc, bonjour tout le monde. Moi, ma question se rapporte surtout à comment consolider les intérêts entre différents acteurs, parce que depuis hier que je suis dans la conférence, on parle de l'intérêt de coopérer, alors que les acteurs n'ont pas les mêmes intérêts. Par exemple, les privés, les agriculteurs, chacun a un intérêt. Par exemple, un agriculteur, il a besoin, par exemple, dans une famille, de se nourrir sa famille, alors que celui qui est privé, il cherche surtout à avoir le gain. Et c'est ça le gros problème. Comment faire? Est-ce qu'il y a un exemple quelque part que vous pouvez nous donner pour montrer un peu comment les gens arrivent à concilier ces intérêts souvent différents? Ça, c'est ma première question. La deuxième se rapporte aux femmes. C'est l'accès et le contrôle de la terre par les femmes.
I'm sorry, I'm going to keep it to one question.
Une question, oui. Bon.
Thank you so much.
Donc, voilà, moi, ce sont mes 2 questions, vous en prenez une. Donc, parce que ça me préoccupe.
And could you introduce yourself, please?
Moi, c'est Madame Sila Laïcha, je viens de la Mauritanie.
Merci beaucoup, Madame.
Je suis de la société civile mauritanienne.
Merci beaucoup. The young lady right in front.
Hi, I am Izide, an advisor at the Norwegian mission here. I have a question regarding the inclusion of youth in agriculture. And yeah, I just wanted to ask if any one of you has concrete good examples on how to include youth in this sector, as we see that a lot of youth is escaping the sector and young people don't wish necessarily to be farmers anymore, and also how to make space for younger solutions in the sector. And because sometimes the youth has a little bit of different ideas on how to do things and how to make space for these new solutions. Thank you.
Great question. Professor.
Thank you, Madam. Rather than increasing the cost of production, perhaps a better, more positive approach would be compensate farmers who do better agriculture through payments for ecosystem services. For example, if farmers do better agriculture to sequester carbon in soil, improve soil health, pay them $50 per credit of carbon sequestration. That is a much more positive approach that will keep farmers at the center of the heart of the problem, that will address several sustainable development goals, including nutritional quality, food quality, climate change, water quality. So let's take a positive approach.
Thank you so much, Professor. Ladies and gentlemen on the panel, I'm going to give you 30 seconds, 30 seconds to respond to that. And I'm going to start with Ms. Westberg. Do you want to come up on the youth question? And then go down my panel and try and use that 30 seconds to give your last and closing remarks. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I would like to answer Iside's question, if I may, and it's a very important question. And this is a big problem in our country, but I think in all parts of the world, to get the youth into the farming. And we have to stop talking about youth and start talking with the youth. And I think, as I earlier talked about the strong organizations for farmers, it's important to have organizations for rural youth. And in Norway we do have, and I know many other countries have those types of organizations, and we do have to support them, and we also have to bring them into those for us, as these are an example of. And I also know there are some youth for us in the FAO system, and that is great. And I think the most important thing we can do, of course, is to secure income for the youth. If there is an insecure income, why would you go into farming? And it's in some parts of the world, it's not that easy to get other jobs, but in our part of the world, it's very easy to get another job right now. So why would you then go into farming if the income is very insecure? So securing the income, and I think the family farming concept also, because then you get to do the farming with your parents and you grow up in the farming, and it gives you a chance to choose farming, if you may. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yes, first to the question, the consolidation of different stakeholders. I think the key word is dialogue. And then a commitment. We have some projects that along the value chain, that producers make a contract together with the distributors or the retailers about prices and different kind of production. And it needs a strong dialogue and intensive discussions, that they find a way for a solution together, a compromise, and then a commitment in a contract. And maybe for the young farmers, we have a young farmers union in Switzerland that is very strong, and we, the government, we include them in all our political processes. So there is always a young lady, a young man, common farmer, and we introduce them in all our processes where they can bring in the view of their association.
Thank you, Christian.
Okay, to add on this youth issue, I think, as I said it before, as we are transitioning our agriculture from subsistence to commercial farming, the youngsters are becoming more interested to do agriculture by mechanization, by tractors, combine harvesters. They are not as such interested to do by the old and traditional way. So now we see that the appetite for the youngsters are increasing as we are mechanizing, as we are bringing with technologies. And agriculture now contributes to 40% of the new job creation in my country because of that. And of course, that helps that rather than the youth migrating to the urban center, when even the urban center cannot absorb it, I think we are now retaining more youngsters at the rural area by providing them more technologies and mechanization inputs, and they are interested to really stay in agriculture. That is what I observed. Thank you.
Vice President, do you want to come in? No, okay, please, go ahead. Mr. Program.
Sur la question de la coopération, quand il y a des intérêts divergents, tout l'enjeu, c'est de trouver un bien commun qui soit supérieur à ces intérêts divergents. Nous avons à l'OMC une négociation sur les subventions à la pêche. Les intérêts sont très divergents. Il y a des pays qui pêchent trop et il y a des pays qui n'ont pas développé leur capacité de pêche. Donc, a priori, inconciliable. Mais si tout le monde continue à subventionner, il n'y a plus de poissons. Donc, l'intérêt collectif, c'est d'arriver à restreindre cette surpêche en négociant. On a eu un premier succès l'an dernier qui prouve que la coopération est possible sur l'interdiction des subventions à la pêche quand les bateaux pratiquent la pêche illégale. Le processus de ratification est en cours. D'ailleurs, j'appelle tous les ministres de l'Agriculture à nous aider à cette ratification le plus rapidement possible pour qu'il soit en vigueur dès l'an prochain. Nous avons une deuxième phase sur les subventions à la surpêche qui est en cours et nous avons bon espoir de la conclure d'ici le mois de février prochain à l'Organisation mondiale du commerce. Donc, quand il y a un intérêt supérieur, et il y en a beaucoup, le climat en est un autre, on peut arriver à surmonter les divergences d'intérêts et c'est tout l'enjeu de la coopération internationale.
I would like to comment on the land rights for women. And although we know we've made a lot of progress, especially in national policies and some of the global normative frameworks, we know it's not enough progress. Land rights for women remain a challenge because of a lot of things, and so we need to work on many multiple fronts. We've seen from a study that we carry out that about 82 of 180 countries that we study, women are restricted to having rights to land, either due to customary, traditional, or religious practices. So in addition to these legal frameworks, at UN Women, we're really working with the other agencies to also look at how we engage customary leaders, how we engage religious leaders, how we engage traditional leaders to change some of the norms and perspectives around women's ownership of land, but also how to support the implementation of the legal frameworks. We know even in countries where those legal frameworks exist, women still are struggling to claim for the rights to that land. We know women are being disinherited once they become widows because they cannot inherit the land that has been held in their and their husband's name. So there's still a lot of work to do with that because we cannot have women producing land, our food, on land that they do not own and land that they can lose anytime because they do not have the rights. So we want to guarantee the rights, but we also want to make sure we secure those rights.
Yeah, thank you very much. Two very short comments. First to the professor and the carbon binding. I fully support your proposal. I think that's a very, very good one. And second remark from my side to our colleague from Mauritania. I don't see such necessary contradiction between farmers and business. For example, there are very good examples here in Italy. We all drink coffee, Ili coffee, and Ili, for example, is very engaged for fairer working condition. And when I met Mr. Ili some weeks ago, I asked him, why do you do that? You fair prices and so on. He told me, yeah, because someone has to pick up, someone has to harvest. And that's also an answer to your, if the young people run away from the farms, from the rural area, who will pick, who will harvest, and so that is, and then of course there is no raw material and no business, and that's of course perhaps the interaction that would help to understand. Thank you.
Thank you very much, panelists. I really appreciate it. And what a rich set of comments. It is now my thankless job to try and see if I can at least bring, a lot of the rich comments from the panelists as well as from the audience together. And what I want to do is to spend literally like 3 minutes to try and see if I can try and do some justice to some of the key issues that came up from the audience and that the panel were fantastic in responding to. I think the first question that clearly came up was on the cost of production, because clearly that also speaks to the incentive question that Madame from Mauritania raised, right? What are the incentives for everyone to be aligned, given that we are speaking to a whole range of different stakeholders with a different set of objectives, from farmers to businesses to governments to multilateral institutions? Cost of production and rationalizing that is clearly one way to go. We also heard from the panelists in cautioning us that as we think about how to value and price our food, whether that's the scarcity value, whether that's the pollution or the cost of abatement, or whether that's the cost of mitigation or the cost of reducing that pollution, we've got to think about benefit sharing. What are the benefits for that benefit sharing, right? And who gets what? So what is the toolbox that we have there? We heard from our panelists, our colleague from the World Trade Organization, speak about trade. And really something that struck me as really important is distinguishing between bad policies and good policies, even if we see subsidies, for example, as being a toolbox, clearly recognizing that taxes and subsidies on quantities or prices are not something that we could advocate. But we could advocate for subsidies so that income levels are raised, so that the power or the consumption basket is made available by increasing disposable income among stakeholder groups. We also heard about the big question of really thinking about how can we bring people together. And I thought it was quite interesting, the discussion. There was this paper that was published many, many years ago, I think 50 years ago, on the tragedy of the commons, and Jeffrey Harden, I think, was the author of that paper that got published, and spoke about, well, we've got the tragedy of the commons, and you've really got to talk about the incentives of every individual, otherwise commons break down. Guess what? Elinor Ostrom came later. Elinor Ostrom from the United States came later to speak about how countries, communities, and groups across the world have successfully, in cooperative mode, managed the commons very, very effectively. And I think that's what the panelists are also speaking about. We've got to think about a new world order, because with COVID, with a lot of the tragedies that we are witnessing in the global commons today, what we are also seeing is an emergence of a new will to take action together. And that cooperative action has been seen to work in many communities, many countries across the world, and it's time to let that sort of system re-emerge. I think we've got to have far more faith in the global commons and in cooperative action than we've had till now. We heard about agro-industrial parks as one example, investing in value chains as another. We also heard about the importance of investing in research and the examples from both Vietnam as well as Ethiopia as to how we are opening up markets in countries so that we're supporting by taking away export subsidies, and by opening up markets, we are dealing with scarcity. We also heard about the question of how to involve youth a lot more. And the question became, well, how, youth look at this question in a very different way. They don't want to go and do traditional agriculture. But clearly what panelists are referring to is, as you think about ICT for development, as you think about new technologies that can make agriculture cool again, we can start to think about youth being far more involved. Family farming is a great way to integrate both our family values, the closeness of family, and to give and to build rural centers so that they are centers of growth. At IFAD, we are looking at exactly that. We are finally, just to close that, we are also looking at compensation mechanisms and payment for ecosystem services. But of course, a lot of the evidence still remains to be examined with respect to the effectiveness of some of these incentive systems to really change behavior. And we've seen this in voluntary markets, but in very small pockets. And the important thing is recognizing how we can scale this up. With that, ladies and gentlemen, we are very, very thankful to this wonderful panel, but also to all of you for your patience, and to the organizers who are sitting here. And I want to thank Karina, Kia, and the rest of the team, and DG Chu as well, for your wonderful participation and engagement with this event. Thank you very much.